So, greetings. My name is Kadeen Smith. I am the project coordinator for the Caribbean Future Forum, based in the office of the United Nations Resident Coordinator of Trinidad and Tobago. Today we are looking at migrant issues and Sustainable Development Goal 16 in the Caribbean region. Of course, SDG 16 is to promote just, peaceful, and inclusive societies, and this is just one of the 17 newly adopted Sustainable Development Goals. I have the pleasure of discussing this issue and topic with the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Regional Representative to the United States and the Caribbean, Mr. Shelley Pitterman. Mr. Pitterman, of course, I want to thank you for allowing us this time for this interview and moving straight into the questions. The first one. Sustainable Development Goal 16 speaks to promoting just, peaceful, and inclusive societies. How do you see this as being relevant in responding to increasing irregular migration in the Caribbean, and what would be the role of the UNHCR?
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for having me. This is a good initiative to help promote understanding of the SDGs and the role of UNHCR in promoting that as well. With respect to SDG number 16, we see the importance of addressing root causes of refugee movements, of forced displacement. So while in the Caribbean, thankfully, there's no conflict to speak of, there is discrimination. Some of it is willful, some of it is benign, but nevertheless, it does create inequalities that lead some people to want to move, and that's something that needs to be addressed in the context of root causes. The other dimension of SDG 16 is, of course, to build strong institutions, justice institutions, and here we see the importance of creating frameworks and developing policies for legislation that allow for refugees to be identified, to seek asylum, to be able to live peacefully in a safe country, to work, to gain livelihoods, to go for their children to go to school, and to seek redress in the event that, for example, in the case of an asylum claim is rejected, for example. So UNHCR is working in several countries to develop such institutional frameworks in order that the right to asylum is respected all over the world.
That's great. And then our second question speaks to the CARICOM principles, which promote, of course, free movement within the region and amongst the countries. So how do we achieve Goal 16 whilst adhering to the CARICOM principles and, of course, maintaining national sovereignty? I don't know if you can share some advice on balancing those three things.
Well, I think it's first to acknowledge that refugees do not pose a threat, that refugees are victims themselves of discrimination, persecution, conflict, so shouldn't be afraid of refugees. Obviously, it's important to register them, to identify them, to establish the validity of their claims, and to make sure that they're in fact in need of international protection. As it relates to free movement across states, we are realistic that refugees, once granted asylum, may not be able to move freely across CARICOM states until such time as perhaps they're allowed to locally integrate and gain citizenship like other Caribbean nationals. But in the meantime, at least we would look forward to them being able to work and go to school, and to the extent that there are constraints on their local integration, that they be given the opportunity to resettle to other countries, whether it's in the northern hemisphere or the southern hemisphere of this in the Americas. But we think that it's important to build those institutions that allow for asylum to be respected and promoted throughout the Caribbean.
And then with regard to the 1951 Refugee Convention, how do you see it being applicable to modern day challenges faced by this region, for example, the current situation in Venezuela?
Well, the 1951 convention is applicable throughout the world. It was really one of the most concrete manifestations of international solidarity and awareness of what was at the root cause, if you will, of World War II. And it brought to bear the importance of collective responsibility and set up standards for identifying people who really do need international protection, people who have a well-founded fear of persecution because of their political opinion, because of their nationality, their race, their religion, or their membership in a particular social group. So we see that those same standards can be applied on an individual basis to people claiming asylum, whether from Venezuela or anywhere else, provided that the institutional framework is in place for people to have proper due access to such procedures. In some areas of the world, they make group determinations about refugee status. We don't promote that necessarily in the Caribbean context, although it is a feature of the Cartagena Declaration in relation to refugee movements in Central America from the 1980s, something that we've just commemorated the 30th anniversary of not too long ago. And we see that it's still a live document and something that states are committed to supporting.
And then with regard to what UNHCR is doing in the region, maybe you can share with us some plans that your office would have for the region.
Well, I would highlight two particular aspects. One is, as a matter of principle, in the context of the UN's work to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, it's important to recall that nobody should be left behind. So wherever we're talking about access to rights, to procedures and justice and education and services, for example, we should remember that refugees need to be included. One way to ensure that is through legislation. And if that's too complicated, then it can be through administrative measures. But it's very important to remember that refugees should have access to all such privileges and rights and should not be left behind. And the second important message, if you will, is that no one country alone can solve a refugee problem. That we've seen in multiple examples over recent years that there needs to be a regional, well, first there needs to be global understanding that as long as conflicts continue, that no area is safe, if you will, from the effects of such conflict, that it has spin-offs and spillovers, and there's a need for regional solutions and regional approaches to addressing refugee movements and to ensuring that asylum seekers have access to procedures and to safety.
Okay, well, thank you. And of course, again, I really want to thank you for giving us this time to have this interview. I think now more than ever, given the complex situations of migration, your points on discrimination and ensuring that inclusive nature in these countries is more relevant than ever before.
Than ever before, in
yes.
fact.
So thank you very much, and of course I hope that your visit to Trinidad and Tobago has been and will continue to be a very productive one.
Thank you, and I look forward to coming again. It's a pleasure
We
meeting
look
you.
forward to welcoming you again.
Thank you.
You're welcome.